Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. 24 hours after the Congressional Budget Office released its report on the Republican plan to replace Obamacare, White House officials said the CBO report just does not add up. And while much of the talk focused on health care, senior aides also insisted that President Trump is confident there will be evidence that he was wiretapped during the 2016 election. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is following it all and brings us the latest from the North Lawn tonight. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. The Congressional Budget Office should stick to dollars and cents and not try to project people or outcomes. That's the message from the White House today as the staff here pushes back against the CBO finding that 24 million people would lose coverage under the proposed new health care plan. The White House has criticized the CBO for not taking into account phases 2 and 3 of the overall plan, which aim to lower the cost of insurance and prescription drugs. But phases 2 and 3 haven't been crafted yet.
How are they supposed to take into account something that doesn't yet exist?
Well, I think that's a question for the House to offer. There are constraints that are put on the CBO in terms of what they can consider. But I think that the point that we want to make is that, and it came up yesterday at the briefing, if members are going to base their vote off a score, they need to understand the totality and the comprehensive nature of the entire program.
Trump care is a wreck. And we all knew that before the Congressional Budget Office released its surprisingly scathing score last night.
Democrats are having a field day with the CBO report, tweaking the president for putting his name on everything from hotels to water bottles, but not this.
No one wants to claim this bill. If it's so good, why aren't they rushing to have their names on it? Trump wants to call it Ryan Care. Ryan wants to call it Trump Care. It's classic Abbott and Costello.
Republican Freedom Caucus co-founder Jim Jordan says there's a reason every major conservative organization, conservative healthcare expert, 5 conservative senators, and a bunch of House conservatives don't like the bill.
I mean, we didn't tell the voters we were going to repeal Obamacare, but keep a bunch of the taxes for an extra year and bring back the Cadillac tax. We didn't tell them we were going to repeal Obamacare, but take the Medicaid expansion and extend it for several years. And we didn't tell them we were going to provide insurance subsidies in the bill and have a 30% penalty, even though the mandate's gone.
The president passed on the opportunity for any public comment today, even though he opened to cameras his Oval Office meeting and lunch with Saudi Arabia's defense minister, Mohammed bin Salman. On the agenda for that meeting, economic reforms in Saudi Arabia and the partial public sale of the kingdom's national oil company. And the White House today added another small piece to the puzzle on the president's claim to have been, quote, wiretapped. The press secretary today saying he expects the Justice Department will provide evidence to Congress to back up the president's tweets.
As I've commented in the past, I think there's significant reporting about surveillance techniques that have existed throughout the 2016 election. I'll leave it to them to issue their report, but I think he feels very confident that we'll ultimately come of this. We'll vindicate him.
The president also worked the phones on health care today, talking with the CEO of Anthem Insurance and talking with the Republican leadership in the House, Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy, about how to whip this bill into a form that can pass the House in its first time around being voted on. And tomorrow, Brett, the president travels to Detroit, where he's looking at making some significant changes in Obama-era rules on fuel efficiency and auto emissions. So we'll be watching for that. Some big news tomorrow, Brett.
Much more on all this with the panel. John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. A school complex in Syria bombed by Syrian government forces back in October was deliberate. That's just one of the atrocities a United Nations investigative commission cites in a new report looking at crimes committed over the last 7 months of the Syrian war. The report stated that government forces and their allies have shown a complete disregard for life and international law in the conflict. Iraqi forces are making big gains in the fight against ISIS as commanders announced troops have taken nearly 3/4 of West Mosul from the terror group. The U.S. envoy to counter ISIS says that any fighters left inside the city will die there. Brett McGurk making those comments as the coalition announced the group was now completely surrounded. President Trump, as you heard in John's piece, hosted a meeting with one of our strongest allies in the Middle East today. The president met with Saudi Arabia's Deputy Crown Prince at the White House. Joining me now to talk about today's meeting is Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, an advisor to the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and a member of the royal family. Your Highness, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I know you weren't in the meeting today, but you've talked about it and heard about it. What can you tell us about the meeting between the Deputy Crown Prince and the President.
Well, Bret, as I understand, it went very well. I think they got along very well personally on a personal level and discussed many important issues, and I think they found agreement on most of those. Prince Mohammed was very keen to come meet President Trump as early as possible to re-emphasize the importance of the relationship between the two countries and to reinvigorate the strategic long-standing partnership that we've had. We've been partners and allies for 50 years. We've worked very well together. Saudi Arabia has been a stable and reliable partner for the United States for that time. And I think Prince Mohammed was keen to make sure that we can move into the 21st century together in a very positive and mutually beneficial way.
As you know, candidate Trump did not shy away from saying what had to be done with Gulf states, especially paying their fair share for protection or going after ISIS, something he reiterated after getting elected. Here he was in December talking about it.
When I look at what's going on in Syria, it's so sad. It's so sad, and we've got to help people. And we have the Gulf states. They have nothing but money. We don't have money. We owe $20 trillion. I will get the Gulf states to give us lots of money, and we'll build and help build safe zones in Syria so people can have a chance.
So what about that? Safe zones in Syria and you all helping to pay the bill?
Yeah, well, Saudi Arabia has always been keen to play its role in the region and in partnership with the U.S., so I think we are more than ready to cooperate with the United States on countering ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, across the region, not just financially, but the Saudi government offered in the Obama administration's time to send its troops into Syria to fight ISIS. That was not met with enthusiasm by the Obama administration. I think that offer remains on the table, and I'm sure the Saudi government is more than ready to support the U.S. in eradicating ISIS. But as I said, not just financially, but actually with its own troops and with its own people.
Interesting. So do you think that that plan is getting to fruition, that the Secretary of Defense has kind of worked on, the President talking about it, and is safe zones inside Syria a part of that?
I mean, I don't know if safe zones specifically were discussed today, but I know that Saudi Arabia is very keen that the fight against ISIS doesn't just involve eradicating it today, but making sure that the ground that helps it come to fruition in Syria and in Iraq doesn't exist in the future. So we have to make sure that the people in Syria and the people in Iraq that are liberated from ISIS can live peacefully, can live in harmony, and that I think involves in Syria specifically protecting them from the Syrian regime and from its Iranian allies.
I know Saudi Arabia is in the middle of instituting some reforms, many reforms actually. While that's happening, the U.S. is considering what's going to happen with the UN Rights Council. Just today, Secretary of State Tillerson wrote a letter this is from Foreign Policy. Tillerson, in this letter to the UN, advocates and human rights groups said that while the United States continues to evaluate the effectiveness of the Council, it remains skeptical about the virtues of membership in a human rights organization that includes states with troubled human rights records. And he mentions China, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think we've always had an open dialogue with the United States about the issue of human rights. I think we've always acknowledged that, at least to Western eyes, there are some deficiencies in the Saudi system. We disagree on some of the assessments that the U.S. has on that, but I think we will continue to have that dialogue openly and frankly and work together to make sure that human rights universally, globally, are respected.
What does the reform mean for people inside Saudi Arabia if it goes as you expect? And what does it mean for countries, if that happens, around the region, Muslim communities and other countries in the Gulf states?
I think, the government of Saudi Arabia is very focused on empowering its people to be successful, to be able to have a good life, a good lifestyle. And I think as long as, we have improvement in the level of education, opportunities for the young folks, of course for women as well and all that, I think that will really marginalize the voices of extremism. And I think if we can set a very good role model for the region, hopefully others in the region can follow us.
There are some economic magazines who talk about Saudi Arabia and deflation, and that's serious concerns about your economy. Is the economy stable?
I think the economy is very stable. Deflation is less of an issue because of how we're structured. We have had the oil price has gone down, and we are reliant very much on the oil price, and that's one of the things we're focused on. Prince Mohammed, the Deputy Crown Prince, of course, his main issue is the 2030 program, which is focused on moving us away from a dependence on oil, on a much more dynamic economy, much more based on information technology, on skills that allows us to really go into the 21st century without this reliance on the oil price, which will allow our economy to weather in the future all of these challenges very well. And I think we have a very strong economic base, so I'm not worried about the economy.
As the U.S. deals with what the president calls extreme vetting and institutes this travel ban of 6 nations, primarily Muslim nations, that they've said, the administration says, has trouble with their visas over there coming here and is dangerous. You're not on that list, but your thoughts about this and what it means for the U.S.?
Well, the Trump administration has described it as a ban not directed against Muslims. I think the Saudi government takes them at their word. I think my understanding is Prince Mohammed did discuss the matter with the president today, and President Trump re-emphasized the fact that it was not directed at Muslims as a religion, but at countries in which the vetting procedure is just not there to allow for safely understanding who is coming to the U.S. and things like that. And look, Saudi Arabia has very stringent standards as to who it allows into its country. So I think we understand completely where the president is coming from in that regard. And as long as he assures us and assures the world that it's not something directed at any one religion, I think it's fair enough for the U.S. to make sure that its security is protected.
Your Highness, we appreciate your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Back here in the U.S., lawmakers already wrestling with this health care bill will need to refocus their attention on the debt ceiling, as the deadline to deal with it is tomorrow. And Wall Street will be watching. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel reports tonight on the next battle brewing on Capitol Hill.
The United States is due to hit the debt ceiling, the government's ability to borrow money, tomorrow night. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin addressed the issue during his confirmation hearing.
The president has made it perfectly clear, and I think it's perfectly clear, that honoring the U.S. debt is the most important thing.
Mnuchin sent a letter last week to House Speaker Paul Ryan noting the deadline is approaching, writing, quote, Treasury anticipates that it will need to start taking certain extraordinary measures in order to temporarily prevent the United States from defaulting on its obligations. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tried to keep the markets calm when asked about it today.
We'll be talking to the Secretary of the Treasury about timing, but obviously we will raise the debt ceiling.
House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi has called for a clean debt ceiling increase, meaning without conditions. Today, Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer challenged the GOP to step up on this issue.
First, let's see if there are enough Republicans who will vote to raise the debt ceiling now that they're in charge. We Democrats have never used it as a weapon.
The top House Democrats on the Budget Committee, John Yarmuth, and Ways and Means, Richard Neal, sent a letter to President Trump just yesterday writing, quote, you have promised the American people that you will not support Republican proposals to cut Social Security and Medicare. We would remind you that a failure to raise the debt limit would also prevent us from honoring those promises to seniors. In October 2015, Congress passed a budget agreement to allow the Treasury to issue new debt as needed through March 15th. The debt has grown since then from $18.1 trillion to $19.9 trillion. Press Secretary Sean Spicer notes the White House is releasing its budget this week, calling it part and parcel of an approach to fiscal responsibility.
How we address our budget deficits, our debt, and our spending going forward is something that is a holistic conversation that the Secretary and Dr. Mulvaney and others, the President, the Vice President, are engaging with Congress on.
It sounds like the Trump administration intends to show a commitment to trim the budget and then will ultimately ask lawmakers to extend the borrowing authority. But nothing happens around here until it's deadline time. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. The former Obama administration is setting records when it comes to a lack of transparency. The Associated Press reports the administration spent a record $36.2 million on legal costs last year, defending its refusal to turn over federal records under the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. The Obama administration also set records for times it told journalists and others it didn't have files that were requested or outright denied them access. The battles on Capitol Hill over health care and the debt ceiling, the president's allegation that he was wiretapped, and the existence of so-called deep state. All of this and more arose when our chief Washington correspondent, James Rosen, sat down with Vice President Pence today, the first in his House office at the Capitol.
Alert and genial, the vice president had just finished meeting with Republican lawmakers on the effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. I asked him about the White House's criticism of the Congressional Budget Office projection that the GOP legislation as crafted would leave 52 million Americans uninsured by 2026.
If that's not correct, what is the correct number?
I think first we want to thank the CBO for their work. And what the Congressional Budget Office is good at is estimating income and expenses in various federal programs. What I think they're less effective at is really evaluating what happens in the marketplace. Now, under the Obamacare mandate, they projected that there would be another 8 million people in the health care plan today than there really are. And so their estimates have been off in the past. I think they're off this time around,
and so
too.
What's your estimate?
I think it's very difficult for us to estimate how many Americans will make the individual choice to purchase health insurance, but we believe it's considerably higher than any estimate that we've seen in the public to date.
With lawmakers bracing for possibly the biggest battle yet over the debt ceiling, I asked about Treasury Secretary Mnuchin's letter last week urging Congress to raise it once again.
Where are you going to find your offsets?
We're very confident that when that vote comes up this summer, that we're going to be in a very different environment. The president's submitting his budget on Capitol Hill this week, and as the economy expands, we believe we're going to be able to meet the obligations of the federal government and deal with the issue of the debt ceiling in a fiscally responsible way.
Every week seems to bring new published reports about the FBI investigating members of the Trump campaign and or the Trump transition for alleged contacts with high-ranking Russian officials last year. It seemed only fitting to raise the matter with the man who shared the campaign ticket and headed the transition.
Have you been contacted by the FBI?
I have not.
The former Director of National Intelligence, General James Clapper, has said he saw no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. But Clapper also said he was unaware of any basis for President Trump's startling claim earlier this month that he was wiretapped last year by President Obama.
When making such an incendiary claim, shouldn't the President of the United States be basing it on something more than something that comes out of the mouth of Mark Levin?
Well, there was a number of various media accounts alleging activity in the days that the president was referring to, and the reports of potential broader surveillance.
Shouldn't the President of the United States, when he's making a claim like that, have something firmer than that?
I think the American people have a right to know what was going on.
Many supporters of President Trump claim that faceless career bureaucrats inside the executive branch opposed to the president are working behind the scenes to sabotage his agenda. The name given to this alleged conspiracy, the deep state.
Of who or what, in your own mind, does this consist, and what are its aims, if it even exists at all?
Well, that's not a term that I've used, but I think President Trump has rightly been concerned about leaks that have been happening. I mean, to have the President of the United States on a telephone call with a world leader in several cases, and to have the transcripts of those calls leaked to the media is just unacceptable and constitutes a breach of our national security.
Lastly, I asked about the working methods of the president and vice president. Mr. Pence said he and the president speak nearly every day and communicate mostly orally. He told us he himself keeps no diary but does take notes when he meets with the boss.
I mean, to be around President Trump is to be around someone who is constantly generating ideas and tasks and giving direction, and so I try and keep track of that.
What for you is the biggest surprise about the job of the vice presidency?
Well, the job of the vice president is defined by one person, and that's the President of the United States. I do think that he chose me in part, James, because of my experience here on Capitol Hill and the relationships that I forged, and the ability to utilize those relationships to help advance the president's agenda is a great privilege to me. I believe with all my heart, when it's all said and done, the end of 8 years, he's going to have made America great again.
8 years.
You bet.
Mr. Vice President, thank you very much. A real honor.
Thank you, James.
James Rosen up on Capitol Hill. Just when we thought it was over, a winter storm delivers a powerful blast to the northeast. Who got the worst of it, and how powerful really was it? Rex Tillerson makes his first official visit to Asia this week as Secretary of State. Tillerson is being counted on to find new ways to deal with the threat from North Korea at a time when a political crisis in neighboring South Korea threatens to upend the entire strategy. And while the Secretary works with U.S. allies in Asia, some are now also questioning the messages he was sending as CEO of Exxon. That story developed today. Correspondent Rich Edson has our report tonight from Tokyo.
As Secretary of State Rex Tillerson departs for Japan, South Korea, and China, North Korean state television is welcoming him to the region.
If South Korea and the United States invade North Korea's sovereignty and dignity, our Army will launch the merciless ultra-precision strikes from the ground, air, sea, and underwater, so they'd better stop being reckless.
To counter North Korean aggression, the U.S. is hosting annual military exercises with South Korea. Will position military drones in South Korea, and, to the objection of China, is also deploying a missile defense system there. North Korea's missile and nuclear programs and coordinating a response to them is a priority for Secretary Tillerson on this Asia trip.
What are next steps we can take to really put pressure on the regime to make them feel and pay a price for their behavior?
There's also a substantial economic component to this trip. President Trump withdrew from the massive 12-nation free trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Asian allies are establishing their new relationship with the United States and its new administration. Then there's China. The U.S. has a more than $650 billion trade relationship and a more than $330 billion trade deficit, a dynamic President Trump has promised to disrupt.
These are valuable trading partners. And, that's another thing that's going to be discussed is, how do we look at trade issues? How do we foster more productive bilateral trade relations with these countries? And that includes, obviously, China.
And as Rex Tillerson makes his first trip as Secretary of State to Asia, New York's Attorney General is accusing Exxon, under Tillerson's leadership, of distorting its understanding of climate change. In a letter to a New York Supreme Court justice, the New York Attorney General's office writes it discovered Tillerson used an alias over email, Wayne Tracker, and that, quote, Mr. Tillerson used this secondary email address to send and receive materials regarding important matters, including those concerning to the risk management issues related to climate change that are the focus of OAG's investigation. New York's Attorney General says Exxon is withholding documents. The oil company says it has been responsive to subpoenas. Exxon also says Tillerson's use of that email alias, Wayne Tracker, was to communicate with senior officials on a host of issues, not just climate change. Brett?
Rich Edson in Tokyo. Rich, thank you. Horrific accusations and talk of sanctions. The rhetoric is heated as the diplomatic spat between the Netherlands and Turkey gets ugly on the eve of crucial elections there. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott reports tonight on the latest war of words.
Events in the usually peaceful European country of the Netherlands are getting a lot of attention these days. Riots in Rotterdam were sparked by the Dutch government's blocking of Turkish officials entering Holland to rally expat voters for an upcoming Turkish referendum. Officials here say they did it in the name of security. Turkish President Erdogan blasted the action, branding the Dutch Nazi remnants, slapping them with diplomatic sanctions and threatening more.
Sooner or later, they will pay the price for this. We are going to take them into account for the Netherlands issue very quickly.
Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, campaigning in The Hague before tomorrow's parliamentary vote, defended his actions to us.
This depends on Turkey. We didn't seek this fight. Last Saturday, we tried to compromise with Turks.
Some say his tough actions are a response to the tougher talk from the far-right anti-Muslim populist politician Geert Wilders.
We have to respond, at least expel immediately the Turkish ambassador and his staff. Otherwise, we accept we're being offended.
And that's not all. Positions ranging from closing mosques to blocking Muslim immigrants to the Netherlands leaving the European Union have touched a chord with the Dutch public. Some polls have showed his Freedom Party taking a lead in the upcoming vote, making officials here nervous.
I'm absolutely convinced that for the Netherlands and for them, Geert Wilders doesn't solve the problems.
His standing, though, has slipped recently, and with other parties refusing to go into coalition with him, he probably won't govern. but he is being felt.
He has an impact without being in the government. Yeah, because he influences the other parties on immigration, on border control, on refugees.
Wilders' populist message can be heard in upcoming elections across Europe. It's already been heard in the States. No wonder some call him the Dutch Donald Trump. Brett.
Greg, thank you. The White House pushes back on the CBO's report over the GOP health care plan, while congressional Republicans say they're willing to change. Plus, the Saudis visit President Trump. Our panel weighs...
As bad as Obamacare does not mean that it's good. It is not good.
Yeah, I think if you read this entire report, I'm pretty encouraged by it, and it actually exceeded my expectations.
The bill's in trouble. It's in trouble in the House. It's even in more trouble in the Senate. And we Democrats are unified.
Well, just some sights and sounds after the CBO report came out last night. You heard the speaker on this show last night, and you heard reaction today all over the board. Let's start there with one mega panel, an all-star panel, editor-in-chief of LifeZette, Laura Ingraham. Juan Williams, hey, Juan, columnist with The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Laura, obviously there are a lot of people coming out saying what is wrong with this bill, what is wrong with the CBO report. Where are we here?
I think right now, Schumer, sadly, for a lot of us conservatives, has the upper hand on the branding of this as, look, we're unified. You just heard him say that. And the Republicans are all over the place, and that is the case. On the other side, in the split between the Republicans, the Freedom Caucus and the fiscal conservatives have called this bill Obamacare light. Obviously, Obamacare is a lightning rod for Republican voters and conservatives especially. And I think that's stuck. I've been exploring this on the air now for 2 weeks with my radio audience. I had Vice President Pence on today. He's making the rounds in conservative media. And it's not popular. And I think Donald Trump wants this to be popular, and I don't blame him. And I think he's seeing the threads are slowly coming unraveled.
Is there a sense that he is somehow stepping away from defending it?
I think he's given orders to fix this if possible. But the fact that he doesn't want his name on this, I think from the very beginning, he's a brand guy. If this brand is going down, he doesn't want to be tagged with it. And that's why you saw the shift over to, this is going to be Ryan's game to fix or to start over, scrap Obamacare, and do a concurrent piece of legislation that makes all these great arguments that all the Republicans agree on. And then take the fight to the Democrats to defend the collusion among healthcare companies, lack of competition, cross state lines, all those good things. Make the Democrats defend them right now instead of saying we're going to do it in some mythical phase 3, which Tom Cotton called it. So I think it's in big trouble unless they can somehow figure a way to amend it and make these conservatives happy.
All right, here's Senator Cornyn from Texas.
They're just sitting back on their hands and taking great glee, great joy out of seeing this marketplace of their creation melting down and people being left high and dry. We are the rescue team that's come on the scene in order to try to salvage a mess that they created when they passed Obamacare along purely party lines.
Of course, he's talking about Democrats there, Juan. You watch Democrats and the politics of this place. When you see somebody having trouble, you just step aside. But they could very well come forward with their own, solutions about how to fix Obamacare and not tear the thing apart. But they're not.
No, correct. And I think, in fact, most Americans would like to see some repair and meaningful repair that would improve Obamacare. But at the moment, the politics of Washington are such that Republicans, having stood aside when Obamacare was passed, now Democrats are saying they'll stand aside and let Republicans have the day. And I think President Obama has urged them to do just that. The critical juncture now comes with a vote in the Budget Committee of the House later this week. And the reason I say it's so critical is you have at least 3 members of the Freedom Caucus who have come out in opposition to the Republican bill. If you get just one more vote, and they're all members of the Budget Committee, if you get just one more vote, it could stall right there later this week in the Budget Committee as a result of Republican opposition. Democrats aren't even party to that argument. And I find it ironic in that Diane Black is now the chair of that committee, but, she replaced Tom Price, who's now head of HHS and who is out. One of the people that was on Capitol Hill today, Vice President Pence, was not only on Laura's show, but up there trying to get Republicans behind the bill. He's not talking to Democrats. He's talking to Republicans. And so you look at the Budget Committee, and you look at a committee, of course, the father of the Budget Committee these days is still Paul Ryan, and Price replaced Ryan, Black replaced Price. And here it comes a moment where you could see all of this long-term 7 years of promise, we will repeal Obamacare, go down in a vote in the Budget Committee.
They have so much behind this, engine. The train stacks up behind this. Tax reform, infrastructure, other things. This binary choice that they tried to sell at the beginning, is it not taking, Charles?
Look, it'll all depend on what the conservatives in the Freedom Caucus decide. They're the ones who can take it down. If they do, the injury to the Republicans and to the Trump presidency is going to be incalculable. In the end, they have to get it through the House. If you want to be completely cynical about this, and in the end try to bring the Democrats back in, you pass it through the House, you bring it to the Senate, and instead of obeying all the rules of reconciliation, you put everything you want into a bill in the Senate, and then you dare the Democrats to filibuster. And if they succeed in doing that, then the Republicans say, we tried, we promised, we tried to get everything in that would rescue this health care system. And then what happens is you get the collapse of Obamacare. And again, if you're playing a very cynical game, you blame it on the Democrats. What Ryan has done, he's trying to obey all the rules, do it through reconciliation, do it in 3 steps, which is the reason why the Democrats have the upper hand. But in the end, it must get through the House. That in and of itself would be the worst outcome for it to die in the House at the hands of Republicans.
Yeah, and just to be clear, reconciliation is the vehicle by which they can pass something with just 51 votes in the Senate, not 60 as usually is required. Laura, I want to turn topics to the wiretapping claims, where we are on the House and Senate investigations. The House Intel Committee asked for evidence from the Justice Department. Here's the White House, Sean Spicer, today on all of this.
How confident is President Trump that any evidence will arise to support his claim?
I think he's extremely confident. I think there's significant reporting about surveillance techniques that have existed throughout the 2016 election. I'll leave it to them to issue their report, but I think he feels very confident that what will ultimately come of this will vindicate him.
Laura.
I think they're going to have to resolve this. And I think that the Democrats want this to go on as long as possible because it allows them to continue to, again, getting back to brand Donald Trump as whatever, paranoid, or he's just, he's going to tweet anything and see what the reaction is. But I think we do have to remember part of what Spicer said there, it's true. I mean, there was a lot of reporting on the surveillance done of Trump associates, former associates, and how those conversations were recorded, whether the dragnet was too wide, who had access to that, the information of the American who initially is supposed to be masked in those surveillance operations. It would be interesting to know if there were other people swept up into those. So Donald Trump has the ability, I think, to unmask a lot of that. On his own, he could do that. But I think...
but if they wanted to stop, why doesn't he?
I have no idea, but I think it's a distraction for the conservative agenda, and I would hope that this gets wrapped up soon.
Well, I mean, speaking directly to Laura on this, I think the president has the power. If he wanted to say, hey, there was a FISA order, here it is, he could do it, right? So I don't think he has it, is my guess, because it is politically damaging to the president, even among his own supporters, that so much time has passed with any substantiation for what is a very serious charge. On the Hill today, people were saying, well, if the President Obama did this, this is beyond Watergate. You are now saying you're using the offices of the presidency to wiretap your political opponents in order to claim the presidency for your chosen candidate? That is extreme. That's like a mystery novel gone awry.
And if it falls short of that, and there was some level of surveillance or some FISA request or something that Bankshot, as Laura mentions, drags in Trump campaign officials, it still doesn't qualify.
Well, no, we know that Flynn was dragged in, for example, but
I mean to Trump Tower.
I don't know where Flynn was heard talking to the Russian ambassador, but that's not what President Trump has charged.
That's what I'm saying, is that there won't be any resolution to that. I want to turn finally to Saudi Arabia, and they meet today, the Deputy Crown Prince with the President at the White House, and an interview here with a member of the royal family. Interesting development here.
We are more than ready to cooperate with the United States on countering ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, across the region, not just financially, but the Saudi government offered in the Obama administration's time to send its troops into Syria to fight ISIS. That was not met with enthusiasm by the Obama administration. I think that offer remains on the table.
Finances and troops turned down by the Obama administration, welcomed now by President Trump, we're told.
Well, that sounds like something that we had not heard about. And I think the reason is that the Saudis are not, this is not about ISIS. That was not the major issue. The major issue for the Saudis, the existential issue, the overriding issue, is Iran and the way for 8 years America had appeased it, fattened its economy, has given life to Hezbollah, which apparently Hezbollah, which is a client of Iran, had run out of money, but now it is flush with money.
And let me interrupt you. And they were fighting the Houthis in Yemen on their border. Exactly. And the Obama administration didn't like everything the Saudis were doing.
The Obama administration naively thought it could strike a Nixon to China deal with Iran, and it has created a superpower and a monster. This idea of Saudi troops in Iraq, why is that? They want to have them, for example, in a reconquered Mosul, because they want Saudis and Sunnis on the ground and not Shiite militias, which is what's going to happen under Iranian control.